In the previous video, I replaced the Z-axis of my Proxxon milling machine and reduced the backlash, the combined play in the lead screw, the nut and the bearing, from 320 to about 55 microns. With some careful adjustment of the nuts later on, I'll probably be able to shave off a few hundredths of a millimeter more. In this final video, I'll be tackling the Y and X axes. To get a clearer picture of what I consider excessive wear, I want to determine whether it lies in the nut, the lead screw, or both. As we saw last time, play in the bearing also contributes a little. I'll be examining the sawn through nut and the shaft more closely under my microscope. It's clearly not just the nut, the screw itself is quite badly worn. That shouldn't really happen. In principle, the cheaper nut ought to take the wear rather than the lead screw. That is indeed the case here, but with 200 millimeters of screw engaging with a 16 millimeter nut, this degree of wear on the screw is really not normal in my view. I suspect the steel is of inferior quality. I'll return to that point briefly at the end of the video. And so, the combined wear of the lead screw and the nut results in an irritating play of more than half a millimeter, enough to make even the most patient machinist groan. Unfortunately, something went badly wrong during the video processing, so apart from a few still shots of the nut housing, I have nothing to show. My apologies for that. The internal trapezoidal pitch of the nuts is 2 millimeters, while the external pitch is 1 millimeter. The long nut is secured with a dab of metal adhesive. By rotating the short nut, the play between nuts and lead screw can be eliminated. I lock the short nut in the desired position with a collar. The Y-axis lead screw and nut are ready. I first fit the lead screw into the bearing block and set the preload by tightening the handle nut. Then I lock the whole assembly in place with a set screw. It is the same design I used when building my micromill, and it has served me very well so far. Now, here's the amusing bit. In the original German version, a single rather wobbly bearing would have cost me more than all 6 thrust bearings and 3 ball bearings from China put together. Superior performance at a fraction of the price, which makes you wonder if the only thing truly precision engineered in Germany was the invoice. Everything is running like clockwork. Time to remount the Y-axis and the saddle onto the base and see if all my hard work pays off with a delightfully low backlash. around 45 microns. That's about 2/1000 for the American viewers. With a bit of careful adjustment later, I'm confident I can shave off another 100th or so. I must admit, this result puts a big smile on my face. Now onto the x-axis. On that axis, there is the least room for a nut, so I'll have to be a bit creative. First of all, some extra space has to be milled into the saddle. As I mentioned earlier, I lost some footage, including the milling of the saddle. Only 2 photos remain. I had already prepared the housing for the x-axis nut in the previous video. But of course it still needs a thread, and the position of that thread is critical. The nut housing is ready. Now onto the bearing block. It has to accommodate 2 thrust bearings and a ball bearing. The system I'm using here is the same one I applied in my micromill. The adjustable threaded bush for the X-axis has a slightly different design. The knurling is made directly on the nut itself rather than on a separate ring. The nut for the X-axis, unlike the other two, isn't accessible from the outside. That makes a hand-adjustable ring rather pointless, so instead, I'll secure the nut with a set screw and a small piece of plastic to protect the thread. And finally, I can get my milling machine ready for use again. I'm curious to see whether the X-axis will also reward me with such fine tolerances. Wow! Just 1/100th of a millimeter of play. That's practically perfect. I'm absolutely delighted with this. Yet something still nags at me. What is it about the original Proxon spindles that, in my view at least, shows premature excessive wear? Of course, I don't expect top-quality shafts in a machine like this. I'm not expecting hardened and tempered chromium molybdenum steel, but C45 steel, preferably hardened and tempered, is a reasonably affordable solution. Yet I fear even that isn't present in this machine. So, it's time to roll up my sleeves and do a little testing. From the now redundant Y-axis lead screw, I made a small tensile test rod with a diameter of 5 mm. I'm curious about the tensile strength and elongation of the material. Fortunately, I made a tensile attachment for my benchtop hydraulic press, which comes in very handy here. (660 megapascal), which could roughly correspond to C45 steel. But to be sure, I'll run a hardness test. Fortunately, a few years ago, I built a tiny yet precise universal hardness tester. Check out the video if you want to know more about it. One thing is certain, this steel is definitely not hardened. With a reading of 14.4, I end up in the unreliable lower regions of the Rockwell C scale. Let's see if this steel can be hardened. If it's C45, it should come out rock solid from a water quench, just as tough as it's supposed to be. Well, I actually expected this. Totally unhardenable. Judging by the tensile strength, we're probably looking at cold-drawn construction steel. Not exactly the ideal choice for Proxxon spindles, but I suppose they like to add a bit of challenge for their users. But what a joy it is to run little experiments like this with your own homemade machines and tools, and to actually get meaningful results out of them. My FF500 has taken another big step forward, and I believe I've now managed to eliminate every genuine weak spot. Certainty on that will only come in 6 years' time, when these new spindles are the same age as the old ones. Still, I'm hopeful. I hope you enjoyed this double episode, and I'll see you in the next one.